EU and Turkey sign such an agreement. And then I would just try to analyze the impact of this agreement. And I will also just to cover some potential problems and so on. Please. Next one. I'd first like to ask you just to pay attention to this map. This map just shows the main European migration routes. So from this map, we can say that Turkey really has a very important geographical and strategic position. Now, it's because a lot of the immigrants just went to Greece from the eastern Mediterranean route, especially from Turkey and then to Greece. Of course, there are some other routes, just because, most Syrian refugees just went to Europe from Turkey. That's why, Turkey just played a very important role in this crisis. Would you like to switch to the next slide? Now I'd like to just talk about the main points I will cover in this presentation. First, I'd like to just present a short overview of EU-Turkey relations. And then I will just talk about some background information of the refugee crisis still. And then I will talk about some major elements of this crisis agreement. And then I will just talk a little bit about Turkey's real political approach to refugee crisis. And lastly, I will just talk about the impact of this refugee crisis agreement. We know that just, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and the Republic of Turkey just was founded in 1923. And at that time, the president, most important leader was Atatürk Kemal. Just this leader just had a very big power, was very influential in Turkey. So for him, if Turkey just want to be respected as a civilized country or power, Turkey must get integrated into European integration or must be a member of the European organizations. So when he was the leader, he just launched a series of cultural reforms. For example, the caste system was abolished, and Turkey even just changed the alphabetic order. In the past, all the works, historical works, were written just in Arabic language. Later, they changed the writing system into Arabic Latin system, and so on. So just influenced by this leader and the successive leaders also just attach great importance to Turkey's relationship with European countries. So that's why in 1959, Turkey applied for associate membership in the European Economic Community. Actually, just before that, in 1949, Turkey just became a member of the Council of Europe. And in 1952, Turkey became a member of NATO. Actually, in that period, Turkish soldiers also even went to Korea and worked with Chinese soldiers in Korean War and so on. Later in 1963, Turkey and the EU just signed an Ankara agreement, and then additional protocol which set the timetable for Turkey when Turkey linked tariff and quotas. And in 1982, Turkey applied for full membership, but unfortunately, it was rejected. Just the other member states, such as Greece, Bulgaria, and they also applied for this. And for some people, they think that even so far as the economic situation is concerned, Turkey was much better than Greece and some other Eastern European countries. But Turkey would still refuse to be accepted by the European Union. So some people still think that, European Union has really very serious grudges against Turkey just because Turkey is a Muslim country, even though Turkey upholds the European values, rule of law, democracy, and so on. Even just some Western powers like the United States and other European states, they turn to regard Turkey as a model country for some Muslim countries. Next one. And we noticed in 1995, Turkey signed a customs union agreement with the EU. And then in 1999, Turkey just became a member state, not just member, a candidate of the European Union. Just because this, once I got in 2011, I got a chance just to study in Turkey, Islamic University in Istanbul for 10 months. That's why I began to develop my interest in Turkey. And in 2005, Turkey began to start accession negotiations with the EU. So if Turkey just wants to be accepted by the European Union, Turkey has to go through a very long, very complicated procedures. Turkey has to just make a lot of reforms to meet the standards or criteria set by the European Union. For example, Turkey has to fulfill the Copenhagen criteria. And if Turkey just wants to finally be accepted by the European Union, Turkey has to just negotiate with the European Union on 35 chapters, such as agriculture, economy, and justice, and home affairs, and so on. But so far, there are only just 16 out of 35 chapters opened, and only one chapter was closed. So you can say there's a very long way for Turkey to go. And so far as the EU-Turkey refugee crisis deal is concerned, we should say, actually, this agreement can be achieved just because in the past, these two sides have made some foundations. For example, in 2013, the EU and Turkey have just signed an agreement, a readmission agreement. It just to deal with migrant problems. If the European Union just wants to solve some migrant problems, of course, the EU needs to cooperate with third countries. For example, Brazil. If some Brazilians just want to just go to the European Union member states, just illegally or Chinese, if they just want to return these immigrants, the illegal immigrants, to China or to Brazil, they have to get cooperation with these two countries. But usually it will just take a lot of time. It will be very costly. So the European Union has to offer some incentives or stimulations. So generally speaking, what kind of incentives will they offer to those countries? The first thing that they will just offer some financial support. And then maybe they will just give some free, visa-free travel just to the citizens of these countries. So actually, in 2013, the EU and Turkey began to talk about this kind of issues. But in last year, the member of the European Parliament just voted overwhelmingly to suspend negotiations with Turkey over human rights and rule of law concerns. So it seems that, later I will just talk about the impact of this agreement. But, there still exists some problems. Because recently Turkey just has gone through a lot of upheavals, a lot of problems. So the European Union just criticized Turkey for violating some human rights, for suppressing freedom of speech, and freedom of press, and so on. So of course, that just made Turkey very angry. So that's why Turkey just sometimes would threaten just to stop or to not abide by agreement and so on. And now let's go back to the background information. We know that in 2015, Europe just witnessed the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. So you cannot imagine that over 1.2 million refugees just went to the member states of the European Union, which actually caused a certain degree of panic of Europeans. To some degree, for the big markets, for so far as the whole population of the European Union is concerned, 1.2 million is not a big deal. But the problem is that just because of the rise of populism, because of the rise of the right-wing parties and so on. So it's very hard for European Union member states to just find out working and the solution for this problem. To some degree, the Schengen Agreement was threatened. Schengen Agreement is really very important and essential for just building the core market, which just encourages the free flow of capital, resources, services, and so on. So this is very essential for European integration. And we know that during that time, some countries, for example, Hungary, began to just build some walls just to prevent the influx of refugees and so on. And what's more, just the influx of refugee crisis also caused humanitarian disasters. In 2015, a lot of people just lost their lives in the sea. For example, just within that year, just over 3,000 refugees lost their lives. And we know maybe some of us still remember the picture of that small boy just on the beach. So, yeah, Turkey, the European Union, as we, is often regarded as a normative power. So they think that if they want to just maintain this good image, of course, they have to, just, the member states have to cooperate to just work out an effective method. And what's more, the migrant smuggling is very rampant. And what's more, this is the biggest concern in the terrorist attacks, especially I think just because of the taking place or the happening of terrorist attack in Paris in 2015, especially in November, which caused a lot of concern. Because a lot of people just worried that during the refugee crisis, a lot of potential terrorists just went to the EU member states. It would be very hard for them to distinguish good citizens, good immigrants from potential terrorist attackers, and so on. And so across the EU, and what's more, I mentioned that right-wing populist parties start to gain increased support in parallel with increasing xenophobia and Islamophobia. So as the right-wing populist party is concerned, I'm sure you will just think, that parties as the Alternative Party in Germany and the National Front in France and the Freedom Party in Netherlands and so on. It just cause to some degree maybe the refugee crisis is not the most important reason which caused the rise of populist parties. But definitely this is a really very important factor which contributes to the rise of such populist parties. Of course, I think the rise of populist parties will greatly affect the political structure or political landscape of some EU member states. And some countries have to form coalition governments, and some traditional parties begin to lose their power, their influence, and so on. Just because of their just sense of anti-globalization, anti-European integration. So definitely, I think the European integration process or globalization process will be negatively affected by the rise of populist parties. Actually, because China is very important trade partner for the European Union, of course, we just show a lot of concern to the rise of such parties. And what's more, some just, the duplication, information and so the existing instruments to control the external borders, like Frontex and Triton, were not effective. So the European member states have to just discuss and to find out another more effective way just to deal with this problem. And what's more, as Brexit is concerned, we can say the solidarity of the EU was heavily threatened. To some degree, provides a lot of British people just voted for leaving of Britain from the European Union. To some degree, they just worried about refugees. And a lot of the European citizens, they just worry about their identity. They think that the influx of a large number of Muslim immigrants will greatly just threaten their traditional European identity. But of course, meanwhile, some parts of some regions, for example, Catalonia, sorry, in Spain, or some parts, or Scotland, some parts they just want to be independent. So that is to say, it seems that to some degree, the rise of the refugee crisis just forced the rise of secessionism. Some people, some groups, some special groups, they want to get independence and so on. So it's very hard to say whether the European member states they have a so-called home identity. It's very controversial, but definitely we can say to some degree this kind of identity has been threatened by the crisis. Okay. Now, let's just come to some central evidence of the refugee crisis agreement. The one important point is that these two sides agreed to just return to Turkey on new irregular or illegal migrants, including economic migrants and asylum seekers crossing to the Greek islands. And what's more, for every Syrian readmitted by Turkey from the Greek islands, resettling another Syrian from Turkey to the EU. But after just 1 year later, after the signing of this agreement, we can say the number of the number of returns is much bigger than the newer. I mean, just actually the numbers of resettlement is much bigger than the new arrivals. For example, just only 900 actually, so as I'm concerned, about just 916 refugees just were returned to Turkey. But more than 4,000 refugees were resettled in the EU member states. And thirdly, the EU and Turkey began to just accelerate the implementation of the visa liberalization roadmap. We now see in the past the Turkish accession process has gone through a lot of setbacks, and sometimes Turkey is felt very frustrated, and they do not trust the European Union, and especially I think after the debt crisis, it isn't that the European Union is no longer so attractive to Turkish people. But I talked with some scholars in Turkey. Some of them thought, just that we still just talk with the European Union about accession, because with the monitoring and supervision of the European Union, the human rights condition or the political condition would be greatly improved. So that's why we still just keep this relationship. But in the past, it seems that both sides begin to lose their confidence, begin to lose their enthusiasm in this accession process. But to some degree, this deal or this agreement began just to make these two sides restart the negotiation. And what's more, these two sides agreed to just speed up the disbursement of funds through the facility for refugees in Turkey and increasing its resources. Actually, this is very attractive for Turkey. How much did European Union promise to give Turkey to deal with their refugees? So as I remember, it seems that the European Union decided to allocate about 6 billion euros to Turkey. And 1 year later, after the signing of this agreement, the European Union actually allocated about 1.2 billion euros to Turkey. So the financial support is really very attractive to Turkey. And what's more, just after Arab Spring and the breaking out of the civil war in Syria, Turkey just accepted a lot of refugees. At present, I think this number of the refugees just raised 3.4 million. 3.4 million. And in 2015, Turkey just received about maybe 3 million, actually maybe 2.7 million refugees. Most of them just were from Syria. So this just poses a very big financial burden, and also just poses some social problems for Turkey. For example, the unemployment rate just increased a lot, and there were more social problems and so on. So definitely Turkey is so far as these problems are concerned, Turkey really needs EU's help. And what's more, these two sides just promise to expedite or just to speed up preparations for opening of new chapters in Turkey's accession negotiations. As I've mentioned, they have to just negotiate with each other over the 35 chapters. But in the past, some small countries, even especially Cyprus, could block some opening some chapters. So sometimes Turkey would feel very frustrated. Now, even such a very small member state could block some chapters. So it would be very hard for Turkey to go through war with the negotiation. Of course, in the past, even France, the big power in the European Union, also were against Turkey's accession, and what's more, France once also blocked the opening of some chapters. Okay, next part. These two sides also just agree to cooperate in just the humanitarian aid to improve the situations of the refugees in both Turkey and Syria. Now, let's come to the next part. Turkey's real political approach to refugee crisis. In this part, I try to analyze why Turkey should accept the offer of the European Union. We know just in the past, Turkey, especially I think at the very beginning of the founding of the Republic of Turkey, the leaders just attached importance to homogenization of this country. For example, once Turkey just signed a population exchange agreement with Greece. According to this agreement, Muslims in Greece should be exchanged with Christians, Greek Christians in Turkey. And what's more, some Kurdish people, they were not allowed to speak their own language in public, in schools, and so on. So, just the government just tried to assimilate some minorities. But, after the breaking out of the Syrian civil war, just Turkey opened the borders. At the very beginning, some people even just agreed that Turkey just helped the ISIS secretly, helped the ISIS to sell oil, or just to allow some soldiers, or just to be recruited by ISIS and so on. So, at the very beginning, some NGOs or some United Nations organizations could not get permission to inspect the refugee camps. Because some people worried that these refugee camps were just utilized or used by Turkish government to support the rebellious groups in Syria. But later, the situation just changed. Because of the pressure just by the European Union or just by the USA, Turkey had to just change its attitude towards ISIS. Another one is just because of the immense financial burden and public process, and I mentioned that. And what's more, I think just Turkey just agreed to sign this agreement because of some realistic concern. Especially I think after the Arab Spring, Turkey was also just greatly affected. In 2013, after some massive demonstration in Taksim Square in Istanbul. The government just suppressed the demonstrators, which was seriously criticized by the EU and America. And what's more, after the Arab Spring, Turkey's relationship with its neighbors such as Syria, Libya, Egypt, just deteriorated, got worse and worse. And what's more difficult, Turkish issue, the Turkey and the United States, they have totally different attitudes towards the Kurdish people in the Middle East area, especially to the People's Protection Units, YPG in Syria. And before, there's another problem that's related to the military coup, which took place in 2016. Um, the Turkish government accused the United States protecting the Gulen, who was the mastermind of this military coup. So they had a lot of arguments. So it seems that in 2015, Turkey became more and more isolated in this area. So it was the right time. It was wise for leaders to accept offer just by the European Union. Now, let's come to the impact of the crisis agreement. So as this agreement is concerned, we can say that the number of illegal crossings just decreased remarkably. In 2017, we can say the number just decreased by 79%. So it's remarkable to some degree. It was successful, and what all the lives lost in the agency drops. For example, before the agreement was signed, in each day, maybe over 10,000 immigrants, illegal immigrants, may cross Mediterranean Sea to reach Greece and some other countries. But after the signing of the agreement, we can say in 2017, each day, maybe about 80 illegal immigrants may reach the European Union member states. As I mentioned, the number of returns remains much lower, yet the number of arrivals, to some degree, the crisis has been alleviated. And what's more, the agreement revitalized the relations between the EU and Turkey and created momentum for the stalled accession negotiations. So they began to resume their relations. They just try to improve their relations because in the past, they just gone through a lot of setbacks. And what's more, the EU's normative power has been challenged. Yes, of course, not everyone has accepted this idea. Some scholars think that when the EU just signed the agreement with Turkey, EU just made a lot of compromise. But some people just worried that the illegal refugees, when the illegal refugees just were returned to Turkey, they still just encountered some problems. They still could not get sufficient services in terms of education, health, and so on. So they think that maybe in work to solve this problem, the European Union did not show much interest in just spreading the European values such as rule of law or human rights, because especially just after the military coup, a lot of people who are just working in governments or in some universities were purged. It means over 100,000 people lost their jobs or just were put into prisons and so on. So, and even the freedom of press and freedom of speech were just threatened. And what's more, some people just worried that Erdogan, the president, not yet the president of Turkey, became more autocratic and so on. So, some people think, okay, it's not right for the EU just to make such a deal with Turkey. Now, let's just come to a brief conclusion. So, to a large degree, refugee crisis has been eliminated by the agreement. For example, in January and February 2016, over 123,000 migrants landed in Greece. But the EU-Turkey deal came into force in 20th March 2016. In April, only 2,700 immigrants, illegal immigrants, just reached the European Union member states. So the number just decreased by 90%. And what's more, the EU-Turkey statement has become an important element of the EU's comprehensive approach on migration. That is to say, some people think that this deal has set a very good example for other countries just to deal with the migration problems. But there still exists a serious credibility problem, as I mentioned, that a lot of Turkish people, they do not believe that the European Union really just wants to accept the full membership of Turkey. So of course, there are many complicated reasons. Some people think the biggest concern that this is a Muslim country, because the majority of people, actually I think over 99% of Turkish people are Muslims. And what's more, the population of this country is really very big. What's more, so as the visa liberalization government is concerned, some Turkish people will also just don't believe that in the future, Turkish people would just travel to Schengen area without visas. But for the EU, the Europeans make understand that it's very hard for just Turkey to meet the standards or criteria set by the European Union, because in order to just meet the criteria, Turkey has to just make a lot of reforms. So there is still a credibility problem. So for some people, they tend to think that the EU is an object of desire and a source of frustration. So sometimes, Turkish people will feel very frustrated. But so as many other factors are concerned, these two sides still link each other. We know that nowadays Turkey is going to improve the relationship with Iran and Russia. It seems that just to deal with some Kurdish problems in Syria, Turkey have to cooperate with Iran and Russia. But of course, we know that in the past, Iran and Russia were just bigger enemies, or rivals for Turkey. So we cannot just believe that Turkey will always have very good relationship with these two countries. So maybe just for example, some people also just to mention would emphasize that now even Turkey just wants to be a member of Shanghai Organization, but it's very hard to say when Turkey will be accepted. I think just, Turkey wanted to just establish a close relationship with Iran and China or Russia, because I think this can help Turkey just to increase the nucleation leverage when Turkey just negotiates with the European Union. So as a membership is concerned, I still think it's very hard, especially in the short term, it will be very hard for Turkey to be accepted as a full member state of the European Union. But owing to its strategic position and very special geographic position, so far as energy supply is concerned, security is concerned, economy is concerned, now these two sides still need each other. they have, so for some scholars they think that, okay, in the future, Turkey can still be a strategic partner for the European Union. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you very much. Sorry, I don't have too much time.
No problem. Thank you very much, Professor Jan, for the wonderful presentation. I will just try to add a couple of remarks regarding this issue, and we may have some time for the debate. Well, go ahead. I'll talk a little bit about which kind of polity, which kind of community is the European Union right now, and what are the prospects for the future. As Professor Jan mentioned, I will deal with the refugee crisis and the rise of the far right and the concept of populism. And I will try to do that in 10 to 15 minutes. Right, this. So, from this morning, we get that the list of the EU dilemmas or problems is very significant. It may not be growing in the sense that the crises are worsening. Some of them are decreasing in importance, as the migration crisis right now. But there's, even without crisis, there are some dilemmas ahead. The European Commissioner, President of the Commission, Juncker, has proposed four very forward proposals for the European Union to incorporate the Western Balkans, to build new agencies, to reduce the number of the commissioners, to extend the Schengen area, other participants, and all of these proposals have to be addressed by the community and the members, but also by the institutions. And this is, has to do with the kind of polity the European Union is. Please go ahead. Even if we consider the European Union only as a strong institutional construction, as Professor Claudia was mentioned before, it is a very complicated process of decision making. It's a very elaborated institutional framework, so it's not easy to get through all of those aspects. Please go ahead. And there is also one question that besides the country members, there's also direct representation from the people. And what people are saying to the European Union right now, we have these groups, and they are not very immediately recognizable from the national politics, but they have some expressions. And I try to aggregate this data a little bit more, and next one. More than 30% of the composition of the European Parliament right now is anti-European Union, or at least have some strong grievances about the workings of the European Union. Of course, from the left side, they want more rights for the citizens and more democracy in the European Union. But the far right also has increased its participation. And this is the election 2000, this term started in 2014 and we went in 2019. So all the fussy about the ascension of the far right is not reflected in this composition right now. Okay. So what we are seeing is a decreasing of the traditional center-right and center-left politics in Europe, both at the national level and at the European Union level. What that makes for the future, it remains to be seen. Please, another one. And the second remark I would make about the inner workings of the European Union is that it's fragilized by the strategic decision the United States made back after the Cold War, which was to conditioning the ascension to the European Union to participating in the NATO alliance. So, in fact, that produced two results. First of all was to encircle Russia and drop the agreement after the Cold War that NATO would not expand and force Russia to respond. And the other thing is to effectively divide and govern the European Union from the beginning. So these two aspects, a growing discontent about the European Union from below, and some limitations of the strategic clouds of the European Union from the above, are the two main big constraints that we should take in consideration regarding the future of this type of political experiment. Well, next I will talk a little bit about the refugee crisis, but given Professor Jan's perfect presentation, I will just agree with him and say this is the problem is decreasing, but one thing, Europeans, and I saw that in Beijing in last July, Europeans tend to think about the refugee crisis as if they have nothing to do with that. It's just an externality. So somehow these refugees appeared in our countries and coming from I don't know where and for whatever reasons. But and here I want to join Professor and defend Germany. If you look at the European members past military interventions in the region, Germany was the most reluctant to actually, for all the reasons that Professor was explaining before, but UK, Italy, Poland, and France, just to take 4 examples, were very instrumental in destabilizing regimes and producing trouble in the outside region, which explains part of the refugee crisis. So they should be held accountable for their foreign policies, as Germany now have to deal with the consequences of those policies. Go ahead, please. So another thing is asylum seekers need to apply from the inside EU territory, which was crazy and helped to a lot to increase the problem. But now that policies are changed for throwing money, and that's one thing that the European Union can do. They can throw money and try to solve the problem. The second, go ahead, please. Go ahead. Okay, so we have less refugees. So my first remark was foreign policies from European members helped to create this crisis, but also the decreasing of this crisis should not be taken lightly. Go ahead, please. Because of the second thing. We do have now just 1.8 million refugee population in the European Union. It's nothing. It's a drop in the ocean. Regarding 2 things. The potential size of the migration process in the next decades and the need of immigrants in the European Union to continue to be competitive in this new global capitalist economy. Go ahead, please. Why Europe needs immigrants? Middle age will increase to 52 years old in a couple of decades. The median age in India will increase as well, but in 2050, what the median age of Europe right now? So Europe will continue to have a less competitive, less able to work workforce, a higher dependence ratio in the next decades. So they need tens of millions of immigrants. Go ahead, please. And even with immigration, a couple of countries, very important countries in Europe, will not be able to stop the declining of its population. So, with immigration, Europe will be better in a couple of decades from now. Without immigration, it will be lost. So, if it had trouble handling the refugee crisis, how the Europeans will deal with a great influx of immigrants they need, or how they will deal with the decadent economy in the next decades without the immigrants. That's the real question regarding the refugee crisis. It's just a yellow sign of what is coming in the next decades. Again, please. One by-effect, one byproduct of both the economic crisis and the refugee crisis is the ascension of the far right. But I don't mean to scare anyone. Even as you remember, the far right, anti-EU, is really small right now in terms of the European institutions and their ability to prevent or to destroy the European Union from the inside. But it's growing. Go ahead, please. Disturbing news in 2017, and all of us have read about it in the newspapers. Germany, now we have a, I would say, far-right, neo-Nazi almost, party with 94 seats in the Bundestag. Now we have a National Front leader receiving more than 1/3 of the votes for president. Now we have 20 seats in Netherlands. Hungary is actually governed by far-right extremists, and with an even more extremist opposition from the right. And even Sweden now, as a far-right party, the Sweden Democrats, and the symbol is a flower, winning 49 out of 349 seats. So in the Riksdag. So those are disturbing news, but again, small, not very mainstream, not very important, not able to undo the European values or something right now. Go ahead. What they stand for, and we saw 15,000 marching in Dresden in 2014, and now we saw 60,000, please, marching in Warsaw a couple of days ago. Do you remember how much friends of Hitler marched in Munich in 1923? 2,000. And the membership of the Nazi Party, when it was in the beginnings in 1919, was 500 members. So less than 10 years later, less than 20 years later, they became the most voted party in the Bundestag. Voted party. So white Europe for brotherly nations, refugees get out, we want God, clean blood. This is from Harry Potter, right? Not red, not rainbow. Not red, not rainbow. National Poland. Fight against neo-Marxists. Watch yourself, Professor Lou. And Islamists. And pray for an Islamic Holocaust. So they can be anti-Jew and anti-Islamic at once. So, worrisome? Yes. Big alarm right now? Not. But what it poses for us? We have a lot of facilitating conditions that explain the ascension of the far right. Economic crisis and redistributive issues, austerity policies are, and this is a based evidence, strong evidence from such representation crisis, a sort of angst, a not defined fear about the future that is contagious for youngs, people that are entering, when finish school have to enter the market right now, but also retirees with less rights and less social welfare. A digital era that has reduced the costs of hate speech. It's very simple and very easy to hate nowadays. You don't have even to face the people you actually are hurting. Actual insecurity is not fantasy. Terrorism has occurred and high crime rates in Brazil. So they produce the same effect. From fear, people tend to be more willing to strong measures against the other. Lack of social integration. It has been discovered that citizenship reduces a lot the availability of people to engage in activism and voting for the extremists. So without citizenship for Turkish people in Germany or for immigrants, therefore they will be more available for recruitment. And one big heritage from Maggie Thatcher, the defeat of the organized labor movement is a big indicator of the ascension of far right back in the 30s and nowadays. Countries that are actually pursuing destruction of the labor organized movements in order to have more economic competition are racing to the bottom. That's the problem. And we just started a new working reform, a new labor rights reform in Brazil. One of the reforms that Brazil really needs. Again, xenophobic and ideological blaming of outgroups, and legal and social tolerance with intolerance are a big problem for pluralists, Democrats, forever. Until when should we be tolerant with the intolerance? And that's a big problem in democratic settings like the European Union. Okay, how do we are explaining this right now? And there's a concept that pops up in any presentation, in any news about this, and it's populism. So populism is everywhere. And I would like to finish by giving you some doubts about the usefulness of this concept. Occupy movement. 90%, 99% dispossessed against 1% corrupt elites. Populism. Any kind of othering has been called populism. Populism has been considered an intellectual force, as in the traditional populist movement in Russia. The Narodnik are intellectuals going to the fields and try to raise the masses of the peasants, but also a very anti-intellectual attitude is called populist. Chantal Mouffe and Ernest Laclau called populism a democratic leveler force. So a good thing, right? But also populists have been called authoritarian forces. So now there are people talking about Islamic populism in parts of the Middle East and also Indonesia. But we also have seen evangelical Christians being called populists. The far right is called populist, but also the far left is called populist. Trump government is considered a populist government, but also the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has been called populist. Popular leaders like Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, former President Lula, Angela Merkel, have been called by the media as populist leaders because they are fond of people, or people are fond of them. So, what do we mean by populism in 2017? One theoretical proposition that deserves our attention was presented this year by Wood and Kapasa, and it's called populism as a thing-centered ideology. What that means? It means basically that it's not a complete ideology. It goes with the host. So it's far left, far right, different kinds of. So populist, by definition, it would be something that basically separates two antagonistic camps: the poor people, the pure common people, and the corrupted elites. And politics should be an expression of the general will of the people. This is the best definition we have. I tried to find a better one, and I wasn't able myself, I failed. So this is the better definition I have for that diversity. And it's not very useful. So my proposition is just drop the concept of populism. It was useful in the 20th century in Latin America, maybe to express a sort of not very well defined alternative, a third way of doing things that was not communist, not far right. But in 2017, if everything and everyone and everywhere is populist, the concept doesn't help anymore. And finally, what is at stake here? Besides the refugee crisis, besides the ascension of the far right, and besides even the dilemmas presenting themselves to EU, let's just avoid to legitimize extremist as normal politics. What's the problem with the far right? It forces the center parties to be more extreme, to not trying to avoid avoid losing more electors, more voters. Let's avoid the battle term. Let's avoid calling people names in that sense. One thing that's a feature of our current political culture is that hate speech and is considered high culture and is accepted as normal vocabulary and normal way of doing things. And both ought trust in the common citizen in terms of the moral and intellectual competence. Elitist views of politics really feel into that sentiment that we are not being represented by the 1% in the society. So organization matters at grassroots level and at national, regional, and global level. So make European Union more strong, make our national states more strong in terms of the institutional building capacity. This is important because there is a direct correlation between the intensity of grassroots organization and the electoral voting of the far right in Europe. Between 2014 and 2017, what changed? The context, the incentives, but also the ability to work at the grassroots level. Within globalization, I know that President Xi Jinping has been championing around the world for the globalization. I think it's right, globalization is better than what has been proposed in Europe by the far right, but without some redistribution of wealth and power, globalization just will produce more people that are hungry and available to revolt. Let's try to continue making humans relevant in the process. Some sectors, services, are slowing down automatization just to keep people working. And China has a big experience, the biggest experience in the world in trying to make people relevant throughout a rapid modernization process. 2,000 million new young Indians reach working age each year in India right now, but they are only able to find jobs for 5 million of them. And India, not to talk about China, India has been growing by a median of 5% in the last 20 years. So it's very strong growth in economic terms. Even for structural reasons, they are being able to create fewer and fewer jobs. Let's try to avoid the pro-cyclical policies, over spending in times of bonanza, hard constraining and cutting everything like our university budget when times are hard. And be careful about kleptocracy, plutocracy, and technocracy as alternatives for the good old-fashioned pluralism. Those three enemies are waiting for the future of European Union, and they are big alerts regarding what can come out of this process. Not today, not tomorrow, but in more 20 to 30 years. And since we are discussing the long-term significance of the European Union, I think it should be trying to continue to be a beacon of hope in the world and not a frustrating experience of the 20th century that historians in the future will say, okay, it ended in the middle of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yang. Thank you very much, Professor Sepiti, for your presentation. Once again, we are running a little bit short on time, but we do have a few minutes for the debate. So if you have questions, please raise your hand and I'll come to you.
Hi, I have a question for Professor Lian, and it seems to me that throughout both presentations, the current theme is relation between immigrants and domestic policy, whereas institutions at the national level are having trouble dealing and including the citizens. Maybe it seems that there is space to include them. It would be beneficial in the long term, but in the short term, it seems that communities don't appreciate the immigrant influx. So, specifically in the case of Turkey, do you, or in your talks with Turkish colleagues, how do you see the impact of immigration and the, how can I say, very dynamic domestic politics in Turkey? As in, from a foreign perspective, they seem rather unstable in the last couple of years, domestic politics in Turkey. So how do you see the relation between that and the immigrant influx in Turkey and the agreement with the European Union?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your wonderful question. Now, so far as the domestic policy of Turkey is concerned, its policy towards refugees. To be frank, I should say I have not done some research on this issue. But of course, some people, especially some European officials, are still worried that Turkey actually lack of the capacity just to deal with the large influx of refugees. For example, at the very beginning, just because Turkey is open the border just between Turkey and Syria, a lot of illegal immigrants just went to Turkey without registration. And a lot of the refugees, maybe actually the most of the refugees, they lack at sufficient service. And a lot of them just live outside the camps, and a lot of children they could not just get an opportunity to receive education, and so on. And so far as job opportunities are concerned, it will be also hard for some refugees just to get jobs and so on. So that's why, that's why EU just offers some help, for example, financial help, and the EU just also established a special organization such as a facility, EU facility for refugees to help Turkey, just to make more regulations or just to give more financial support to Turkey. So I think just with the help of the European Union, progress of the situation will be improved. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I have a question to Professor Sepi, and I think that I have to ask him this question in English. Okay. Sepi, it's a simple question. Why you choose those 5 countries in to illustrate your presentation about the community Europe?
Sorry, you mean
Germany, France,
France, UK, and Poland?
No, UK, Germany, France, Netherlands, Hungary, and Sweden.
Oh, just to have a sample of Scandinavian milk democracies and former communist in Eastern Europe and some Western countries. Just it was not very scientific. So of course there are worse situations in Europe than Hungary right now and Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in regional part of Germany. The extreme right got more than half of the votes there in the last state election. So it was just a sample of different countries. And regarding the interventions, because those were the most important countries, to show that even Poland can conduct its own foreign policy with extremely dangerous consequences. And as when Poland and Lithuania decided to destabilize and help Euromaidan in Ukraine, they showed that neither Russia nor United States has a complete control of what's going on in the eastern part of Europe right now. That was the main reason. Thank you.
Thank you for the 2 presentations. My question is also for Professor Sapik. You talk about what kind of policies Europe, the European Union, and then the rise of far right related to many things. It's the failure of nation states or the European Union, because it's everywhere. Populism and far right. It's not. It only appeared in Europe. So, how to assess this? So, what's the problem of the European elites? Well, let's say this era, if so many complaints against them. That's the question. Thank you.
Very good question.
If I may, Professor, I'd like to complement the question. following your presentation, in your first slide, you quoted Jean-Claude Juncker, who is the president of the European Commission. And in 2016, while addressing the European Commission, he went as so far as to say that the European Union is facing an existential crisis, which is a hard statement. Do you agree with that, and why?
Yeah, I like Professor Lamarck's proposition. The wind will decide. That was a very clever one. But yes, it's not an European phenomenon, but we don't have European Union in other parts. So the main point, and I probably wasn't very clear about it, it's which kind of risks for the European Union as such, as an institutional frame, the ascension of the far right in Europe represent? Which kind of, is it existential or is a middle age crisis for the European Union? And I would say that it's existential because it's forcing the established political parties and the economic elites and the middle classes to go for more extremist views and trying in a crisis to rely upon a more certain sources of identity. So less European identity, more national identity, or even subnational identities like Catalonia or things like that. Therefore, I think there's an existential threat for the European Union in that sense. Not now, but in the future. If European Union and Europeans cannot address their difficulties in accepting lots of immigrants, if they are not able to address the relationships with Turkey and Russia, European Union as a very interesting political construction will fall apart in the next decades, I fear, out of this process. So it is right now just a middle age crisis, but has the potential to be very destructive in the future. People are saying that even the euro is not very safe right now, and macroeconomic policies could lead to. So I'm kind of less optimist than most of the presentations so far regarding the future of the European Union. I'm afraid.
So,
I would like to raise a question to our brilliant professor. And roughly speaking, the similar capital was there two categories or two systems of phenomenon of populism. If you consider populism, and you refer to Putin and Xi, and even you go to Turkey, their president. And we found that populism is from the above. And in the large part, they mobilized by political. And its effect is strengthen rather than weaken the existing political system. You can say authoritarian or any other. But populism in the United States, in EU countries also. This is from below. And its political effects greatly weaken the political institution and even and political value. And my question is that this is of course is a very rough observation of mine, and if you have some words and to talk about that.
Recent deceased Professor Giovanni Sartori wrote a definition of conceptual stretching back in the 70s. And conceptual stretching is when a concept can mean its own and its opposite. So what kind of concept is populism? It can describe strengthening the political system from above and weakening the political system from. Okay, we could say that it's a very dialectical concept, but it doesn't help a lot in terms of. So that's why I found difficult to use populism as an interpretative frame for all this phenomenon that is going on in the world right now. We could say that the digital era in general is breaking down the middleman, the middle term, the middle structures. So people are relating to business and to governments and to each other more directly. And probably these corrosive forces can explain more than the concept of populism. But anyway, I was talking with Professor Yanin. If we don't call them populists, what should we call them? And another thing is that calling them populists or nationalists is just a cowardly way of not calling them neo-fascists or neo-Nazis. That's what they are. So stop calling them by mild names and let's call them by what they are. If they defend a racist view of the order and burn the witch, they are not nationalists. They are not. They are just pure Nazis. That's my point. Let's try to invent. And I also don't like in social science and economics the amount of neos and posts and so because but neo is better than a gray area of a very undefined concept. So.
So I would like to continue the question. And I appreciate very much your comparison between different types of populism. Yeah. And I noticed that you tried to mention the similarity between Islamic populism and Christian evangelical movement. So would you please let us know your basic opinion or observation or something else? Thank you.
I'm afraid that I will not be able to answer it properly because I'm very ignorant about Islam and Christianity as such. But I read about the growing position of sort of revivalist and fundamentalist populism in Islamic countries as well. And you may say that other than being terrorism, the Islamic State is a very popular movement in terms of appealing to the common people against the corrupt elites that they are not interpreting the Quran rightly. So Christian evangelicals in Africa and they also appeal directly to people and trying to discredit so they are part of this from below to above. When one of these figures comes to power, they use the term populist to describe the Jokowi government in Indonesia, and I don't think it's a very accurate way of describing that government. So that's the problem. I don't think if we are talking about Islam and talking about Christians and about what we gain in calling all of them populists in general. That's my point. But I don't know exactly how we should describe those movements. I still live in a left and right world, just one axis. I don't deal well with this other axis of elites and people. So I can see a right movement and a left movement, but I have trouble seeing other types of ideological constructions.
We have time for just one final question.
Good morning. I have a question for Professor Yan. You talked about the relation between EU and Turkey, and you talked about the concerns of European countries on Turkey admission or question regarding human rights. We then talked about the future possible strategic cooperation between the two countries. I would like to know, in your opinion, how the adoption of the Pillar of Social Rights, which they approved in Gothenburg, would change, could eventually affect the relationship between Turkey and the EU. Thank you.
I beg your pardon, that's part
Could
of
you,
your.
could you repeat the last part?
Yeah.
The Pillar of Social Rights,
The view of social rights.
yeah, recently approved in Gothenburg, how could it eventually change the relationship between EU and Turkey? More questions regarding issues regarding human rights.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm concerned, now in the past, even just before EU and Turkey signed the refugee crisis agreement, in the EU just has just given a lot of pressure to Turkey just to improve human rights situation. Because if Turkey just wants to be accepted as a full member of the European Union, Turkey has just to improve the situation or has to make a lot of reforms. For example, once when Erdogan just came to power, the death penalty had been just abolished. The human rights condition has been improved, but the problem is that just after the riots just happened in Taksim Square, and after the military coup, in order to great power, so there, just we know in this year, just April, Turkey held a referendum which just changed Turkey's parliamentary system to presidential system. So some people worry that Turkey just will become more autocratic, or just the power will be more concentrated on the president and so on. So I think just another very important issue is related to the Kurdish issue. Just in order to just suppress the separatists in Turkey, especially Kurdish separatists, in order to bring more power. And at present, maybe the Erdogan did not pay much attention to human rights issue. This is not a priority. But I think so far as the president was sure or is sure that no other parties or other political groups just threaten his power. And so far as Turkey's relationship with the European Union just will be improved. Gradually, I think just Turkey will show more concern. Will show more concern to the human rights and to try to improve the human rights situation in Turkey. So maybe just at present, maybe we're not so optimistic that for the long run, you can say definitely the situation will be better. That's my prediction, or that's my understanding. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yan. Thank you, Professor Sepiki. With this great debate, we conclude our morning panels, and we will resume our activities at 2 p.m. after the lunch break. Thank you very much.